Hi, I'm Jim Kreider, and this is the Intentional Living Podcast, where we have conversations about how to use your resources, your time, your money, your talents, for what's important to you in life in an efficient and effective manner. I'm glad you're joining with us today, and I look forward to this journey with you. In today's podcast, I'm joined with Marty Bent. Marty is deeply involved in Bitcoin in lots of areas. He hosts a couple of podcasts that are about Bitcoin and their current events. He is the director at a mining company, and lastly is a partner at 1031, a venture capital company that invests in Bitcoin companies. Now, Marty, he and I today, we're talking through Bitcoin and mainstream adoption and what a future on a Bitcoin standard could look like. So thanks for joining us for this conversation. Let's get started. All right, Marty Bent, thanks for joining me today. I'm excited to have you here.
Jim, I'm excited to be here.
Well, let's see. I have, as we talked about before recording, there's a lot of things that I would love to talk with you about, but we don't have enough time. So where I would like to go with you today is just talking through where all Bitcoin can go and how you see that playing out from just the impacts it will have on different economies and the business sector and everything. But here, I guess before we go there, why don't you just tell me and us about you, what you do, and business, life. Who are you?
So first and foremost, I'm a father and a husband. I've got two young boys and a beautiful wife. Really the anchor behind us. But beyond that, I own and run a media company, TFTC. I founded that in 2017. Essentially started as a newsletter to help educate my friends and family about Bitcoin, what it is, what they should be paying attention to. It was during the beginning of the bull run in 2017 or June 2017. I was getting texts, calls, emails, and I was like, hey, all right, everybody stop doing this. I'll write this newsletter. I'll send it to you once a day. You don't need to reach out to me. That morphed into a podcast later that summer and beginning of September, I believe, which is TFTC, which is interview series I host. That morphed into another podcast, Rabbithole Recap, that I do weekly with Matt Odell, covering the topics that pertain to Bitcoin, privacy, freedom tech in the digital age. And then I'm also a managing partner at 1031, which is a Bitcoin investment platform focused on investing in companies building out the infrastructure that people will leverage once we're under a Bitcoin standard. So we cover the whole gambit of the subsectors in the Bitcoin industries. That could be mining, custody, security, Lightning network companies building on the Lightning network, and then even credit products that are beginning to materialize as well. So started in media. I have a background in finance before I started the media company, and now parlaying that into 1031 and what we're doing to invest in the space.
Sweet. So you've been in this space for a bit. I actually listened to one of y'all's, you and Odell's most recent episode last night, talking about are we in the next bull run? That was a lot of fun. I will abstain from going there. I think we both agree that Bitcoin's in a forever bull run until we see global adoption, and then Bitcoin will become really boring. That's the goal. But yeah, so with 1031, obviously you have the I would imagine just amazingly fun job of getting insights and pondering all the different places that Bitcoin will go once, as you mentioned, once we're in a Bitcoin standard. So I guess before we go into the details, like what do you mean by Bitcoin standard? Again, we're like, let's just take it like we're talking to an audience that maybe just owns some Bitcoin and is just beginning. So in these past conversations prior to you joining us today, we've had conversations about like macroeconomics, monetary policy, fiscal policy. How in the world did we get here? Oh, Bitcoin very well could be the solution that gets out of this absolute mess that we're in right now. What is Bitcoin from a generic or general A to Z conversation? So when we talk through like, all right, a Bitcoin standard, what in the world does that mean?
I think it's a very simple explanation. A world living under a Bitcoin standard is a world in which people acting throughout the economy save their money in Bitcoin and transact in Bitcoin. It is the store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account that people use to price the goods and services that they purchase within the economy. I think it's important just to keep it simple. The Bitcoin standard is a standard in which people use Bitcoin as their money, whether it's to save or spend.
It's interesting to think through the implications of just having a money that is not centrally controlled and not debased by anything. Like one of my least favorite conversations, especially a few years ago when the money printers were on, yet we weren't seeing inflation day to day. It was just in like aspects of life. So like houses, I live just a little bit south of you in New Braunfels. So here, like, I mean, 2021, my house appreciated by 33%. And at that point, the money market funds and stuff hadn't caught up yet. So your bank was yielding like a 0.25%, but yet your house was appreciating by 33%. So I hated the question of, Jim, I want to buy a house in 1 year. How do I save for that? And that's only a question in a system where the money's broken itself. Like if you have money that's not broken, it's like, hey, I want to buy a house in a year. What do I do? It's like, well, save your money, because the money itself is it's meant to be saving mechanisms. But when you have money that's hijacked, you lose. You have it's a currency, it's a means of exchange, but it's not a means of savings. And what you just articulated is it's both of these things, which is so foreign. Like right now, we use savings accounts. Basically, a savings account is like the index, like buying index funds. Like we're just hoping to retain value in that. So yeah, interesting. So what do you like? How do you see that happening? Like right now, there's a global adoption of like 1% of Bitcoin. So like, what? How do you see that play out? Do you have a thought on it? I mean, obviously, we're just guessing. But do you have a thought on like how that happens and what's the time frame? Will it be fantastic and this great deleveraging of in Ray Dalio's words, or will it be ugly? I mean, I have a picture right here on my desk of kids stacking money in post World War I Germany. Like, will it look like that? Is the U.S. dollar and around the world? Like, give me your thoughts here.
I don't know exactly how it will look, but since Parker Lewis is standing literally a dozen feet away from me outside the studio here, it's probably going to happen gradually, then suddenly, which means we're definitely in the gradually part. We may be approaching the suddenly part, but I think that's part of the beauty of Bitcoin, whether it be via the network topology. It's very grassroots. Individuals running nodes, plugging miners in. That part of the network is very grassroots. You have tens of thousands of individuals and companies dispersed throughout the globe, just using economic incentives to drive them to do this thing, whether it's running a node to verify that they're actually receiving the Bitcoin they think they are, or to plug in a miner to contribute to the production of blocks so that they can make Bitcoin. They can produce Bitcoin cheaper than the spot price at any given point in time. So run a profitable business that allows them to stack Bitcoin. But then the other side is of the grassroots movement is the individuals who decide to use Bitcoin as money, whether it's via a savings vehicle or a transactional currency. And so that will really dictate when the suddenly part comes, is when more and more individuals come to the belief that Bitcoin is the best money that is on this planet, and they decide to acquire it by selling goods and services, by exchanging their dollars for Bitcoin and holding it on their personal balance sheets. So that's, I think, the next big step to take, is this educational effort. Maybe it doesn't even need to be effort. Maybe people come to the conclusion themselves, but more and more people recognizing that Bitcoin is money, that it's better money, and that's money that they should demand. And that is facilitated by companies and software projects that make it as easy as possible to receive and send Bitcoin in ways that are at parity with the ways in which people send and receive money in the incumbent financial system.
That's there's one if you're hearing that and it's like, what in the world is a node and mining and stuff? A few episodes ago, we talked with a guy named Michael Schmid. You should go listen to that episode. We talked through like, what is a node, what is mining, what do these things mean, and just to reiterate that, like, you don't have to know all of these things. Like, I don't know, I have zero clue how Marty, you and I are talking right now, and I can see you in real time. Blows my mind. I'm not going to try to figure it out. I just know it works, and I don't know. And you can explore these things. I think Bitcoin is a lot easier to understand than our current fiat monetary environment. Like it's code that's written out, and there's certain principles that exist versus things that are just made up ad hoc based off of a small group of people in a room. I think it's easier to understand than our current financial situation, but I also think it's okay to settle down and say, I don't fully understand how it works, but I'll use it. And now with that, there's right now, just because you have to remember, this is a young technology. And if you're going to go do things, if you're going to run a node or set up a lightning channel, it can be clunky. But as we see this thing progress, it will become more and more obtainable from a use standpoint. So let's go there. Marty, like, what are you seeing from a one, I guess from an adoption standpoint, especially with everything going on with like ETFs right now and BlackRock and all that, like what are your thoughts as far as adoption from corporations, governments, and individuals? Is one outpacing on adoption rate more than another, or is it general? Like moving forward, how do you think that's going to take place as well?
Yes, I do think individuals are certainly outpacing adoption more than businesses or countries for that matter. It's That's the beauty of Bitcoin too. Again, going back to this grassroots nature, particularly of acquiring Bitcoin, individuals are usually the first that come to realize like, oh, Bitcoin's a better money. I want to hold a better money. And so that historically, throughout the first 15 years of Bitcoin existence, is probably the main driver of adoption up to this point from like an individual basis, number of people adopting Bitcoin. Because when you think of it too, like when you get to the company level, the company makes decisions based off the consensus of a bunch of individuals. And so for companies to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and you need a bunch of individuals within that company to come to a consensus that, hey, we should probably acquire some Bitcoin for our treasury. So that adoption is obviously a bit slower than you would see at the individual level. And then when you go up to like the financial system, the banking system, pensions, what it may be, those decisions are even harder because they're much more conservative and they're much more burdened with regulation and allocation mandates that they have to live within. And so the sell to get to the tipping point of Bitcoin adoption is a much higher bar. And so, yes, I do think there are different tracks of adoption. Individuals have adopted it much quicker. Businesses are getting there. Obviously, MicroStrategy has been a big advocate of that. And then institutions like endowments, pensions, banks will probably be a bit slower. It's just the nature of how you come to the consensus for this decision to put Bitcoin on your balance sheet. With that being said, I do think something like the FASB guidelines that were released earlier this year will be a catalyst to make it easier for the businesses to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet, the way that they can mark to market their Bitcoin holdings year in and year out. The new FASB guidelines make that much more palatable for a business, whereas before you just had to mark to the lowest price of your Bitcoin holdings at any given point in time, and you had to keep it there, which was not conducive for good financial reporting. So it seems like, particularly in the accounting world, the regulations are getting to a point where it's going to make it easier for businesses to adopt. But yeah, in totality, individuals are certainly adopting it at a much quicker pace, which I think is good at the end of the day. And then those individuals working in businesses and institutions have to convince the others that they're working with that it's worth putting on their balance sheet, and that takes more time.
Yes, this is an opportunity to see, I mean, like front run BlackRock, but also like sort of reverse the Cantillon effect of these people who have controlled the money, large institutions, and generally people who just wield more control. Now's the time for the individual to come in, and no one has more control than another over Bitcoin, but the early adopters certainly will benefit by price appreciation or purchasing power appreciation than a later adopter. So this is the opportunity that we haven't seen before, with normal people to come in and front run these institutions and corporations and governments, which is just amazing to think about the long-term implications. I know Bitcoin can seem volatile on a day in day out basis. You know, there's a lot of memes in Bitcoin, and one of those being like one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. It's worth one Bitcoin. But at the same time, if you're checking your Bitcoin and you see that it's pegged to a dollar amount, and what we're concerned here is not necessarily the uh, uh, trade amount of dollars to Bitcoin. It's the purchasing power itself, and eventually, as you mentioned, as we see Bitcoin become this unit of account and means of transferring value, that the Bitcoin itself will be denominated not in a dollar parity, but rather it will be a means of communicating purchasing power itself. So I guess let's start talking through things that I guess excite you once we see this full Bitcoinized world. Like, what do you mean? Like, what would that change? Like, as I mentioned earlier, having a sound form of money, I think will just do wonders with making saving money so much more obtainable and way less complex. But what else? Like individuals, companies, like from a project to just an opportunity for I don't know way business is done. Like what are things that excite you?
There's many things. So I think to jump into this part of the conversation, it's probably to dealing, like demarcate the different sectors. And so we'll start with like the base layer. And I should probably make the point that I believe for Bitcoin to succeed as wildly as I think it can, there's an order of operations to its success. And the lower rungs of that order of operations, or the front end of those order of operations, revolve around custody and security. And there have been a lot of developments in the custody realm, particularly, that have me extremely bullish and really paint a fascinating picture of how business can be done in the future. And so, as I'm sure you're aware of, throughout Bitcoin's 15-year history, there's been many exchange hacks, Mt. Gox, uh, Bitfinex, Bitstamp, obviously FTX, and sometimes not even hacks, just pure frauds. FTX, Celsius, BlockFi have taken in people's money, told them that they're going to take their money and buy Bitcoin with that, hold it for them, and they've completely lost it. And I think this is due to the nature of people trying to apply the incumbent fintech infrastructure and user experience to Bitcoin and not really leveraging Bitcoin's native properties that give the end user and the end customer more assurances than exist in the incumbent system. And so what I'm excited about in the custody sector is this move towards multi-institution, multi-sig custody. So within Bitcoin, you can set up a wallet in a way where to move the Bitcoin out of the wallet, you need N of M signatures to move the Bitcoin. So you need 2 of 3. Just use the example of 2 of 3. If you want to move Bitcoin from the address, you need 2 signatures from 3 of the wallets in the quorum. And this allows us to create new standards for custody that rival the incumbent financial system. And so down the hall for me is Unchained. They have trailblazed this part of the Bitcoin industry, which is using multi-institution custody to secure people's Bitcoin. And so on that side of things, we've seen Unchained do it. We have companies like OnRamp, AnchorWatch. There's more and more of these companies coming to market. And essentially, when the adoption of the tools that they're building becomes widespread, you have this incredible ability as an end user to verify that the counterparty you're interacting with has the Bitcoin they say they do. And so with this, I think new standards are going to be built where when I go to Unchained and I take out a loan, for example, I put my Bitcoin in a 2 or 3 multi-sig wallet. I have a key in that quorum. Unchained holds a key, and Kingdom Trust holds the 3rd key. And so that's myself and 2 institutions involved. And since I have a key in that quorum, I have visibility, knowing throughout the duration of my loan that my Bitcoin is where I think it is. Unchained and Kingdom Trust have not moved that and rehypothecated it and lent it out to some degenerate trader that can use it on a bet. And I think this ability is really going to change the landscape of the sort of structural integrity of the financial system built on Bitcoin. It really reduces the ability for institutions to misallocate funds and commit fraud, which I think is going to be massive. It really disincentivizes those actions. And so it's really a forcing function for good business at the end of the day. So that's one thing that I'm very excited about.
I was well, with where that's heading from a custodian and even the safety and security of being able to take a loan and use this as collateral, we're seeing growing pains. And I was thinking about this last night, actually, with uh, this last bull run, the amount of people who were advocating for uh, using X exchange, where you would get a whatever 14% yield on your Bitcoin that's kept there, and then the amount of Bitcoin that was totally lost, and the just the grand scale of rug pulling that took place. Um, yeah, there's obviously you use the word rehypothecation. Do you want to, before we keep going, do you want to just like what does rehypothecate mean? Just to make sure we're using like people understand as we go forward.
So rehypothecation is essentially when you're interacting with a custodian and you either buy Bitcoin from them that they're supposed to hold on their balance sheet, or you send Bitcoin to them that they're supposed to hold on behalf of you. Rehypothecation is them essentially taking that Bitcoin and giving it to somebody else that isn't you. So your Bitcoin is being rehypothecated. And typically throughout the history of the industry built around Bitcoin, when companies rehypothecate Bitcoin, they're usually giving it out to traders who are taking risk with that Bitcoin. And that is how you can get yield products like Gemini's Earn product. And they were partnered with Genesis. Genesis was rehypothecating Gemini's users' Bitcoin and sending it to trading houses like 3 Hours Capital, who were taking that Bitcoin and making degenerate bets on other cryptocurrencies that essentially went to zero. And when you rehypothecate that Bitcoin and your custodian's counterparty on the other end loses that Bitcoin, you don't get it back at the end of the day.
So during that process of rehypothecation, all the while you've seen, oh, I have one Bitcoin. I see it on this screen when I go to xwhatever.com. It says one Bitcoin, so it's there. But you're not seeing that behind the scenes, your Bitcoin that you purchased was used as collateral in someone else's trade. So they then essentially created a second faux Bitcoin, the one that you're seeing on your login, and then the one that they're actually utilizing in someone else's trade. So they're creating fake paper Bitcoin as a means of trading behind the scenes versus having it locked up in custody that's not able to be done. That process is unable because again, like using a multi-sig setup, you retain the keys, and these other institutions who should have your best interest in mind and can't move it on their own are not able to take this and use it as a means of collateral without your permission. Um, so it's pretty important from a security and safety perspective. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, and I think what you touched on there, right? You don't, with Bitcoin, particularly these multi-sig primitives that are available to Bitcoiners. If we now live in a world where if you interact with a counterparty, they don't have unilateral control of your funds, and they can't do things with your funds that you wouldn't want them to do. And so with the multi-institution setup, you don't even have to have a key in the quorum. You just have to have an address that you can audit at any given point in time to know that the Bitcoin's there and isn't moving. It's totally possible with this setup too. But again, going back to the economic incentives and the social incentives that this new paradigm introduces to the market is you can interact with a counterparty like Unchained, but due to the multi-institution setup that they have, particularly with Kingdom Trust and now CoinCover, to mismanage your funds, you need two institutions to collude to mismanage your funds. And again, going back to incentives, that is significantly reduced. The possibility of that is significantly reduced because you have two institutions that have many different business lines, and you have to assume that they're not willing to ruin their reputation by mismanaging funds. And the fact that one company, Unchained, doesn't have unilateral control, even if they wanted to mismanage your funds because they got in a problem, and this is just an example, I don't think Unchained is doing any of that. They can't, which is a big shift of power back to the end user at the end of the day.
Here, it's hard to think through this objectively, considering just it's the environment that we've been in. I mean, our whole lives. So like for instance, banking. Like it's hard to think through a bank, their job actually just being keeping your money safe. Like that's so foreign to us as a concept. Like everyone, I think most people recognize if you put money into a bank, it's not there. It then immediately becomes someone else's asset as well. And you see it there and you expect it to be rehypothecated. You own it, but yet it's somewhere else. And if you go and you ask for $1 million, they're not going to have all million because it's somewhere else. So it's foreign. We only expect that for banks. We know that they're not in the business of actually protecting our money and holding it. They do other things with it. And I would say the same thing with like, if you're going to take a loan and use your Bitcoin as collateral, I think the water we've swam in for so often has at least maybe I'm just speaking for me. I think I'm speaking for a lot of people though. We become so normalized to thinking like, well, how else are they going to make money? Like, why would someone else take that risk and set up a business of literally just owning like allowing an asset to be on their balance sheet that's a loan if they're not creating yield off of it? And to create yield off of it, they have to go take that asset and do something with it, and they can't. So like, how would that business even function? Like why would someone else set up a business to do that if they're not able to like take it and go and speculate on that asset that they're supposed to be just watching? Like, how does that work?
Like the business model is going to have to shift where people, particularly if they're engaging in with a partner or multiple partners in the multi-institution model that are going to secure their Bitcoin, I believe, is going to be one of the most valuable assets on the planet. And so it's going to be worth paying to secure it. And so I think that'll be one way in which these companies create new revenue streams. And then two, while we're in this transitionary period, Unchained has their lending desk, and you can use Bitcoin as collateral to get a loan. And there's an interest rate associated with that loan, typically higher than your average interest rate right now, just because of the relative lack of information on behalf of credit funds understanding Bitcoin. It's a bit riskier to them, even though the sort of collateral setup that Unchained has is 40% LTV. It's one of, in my opinion, Unchained's a 1031 portfolio company. It's one of in my opinion, nothing's risk free, but it's like one of the least risky sort of credit products that exist on the market right now. You can get revenue from that, and then value added services, like actually providing value in terms of advisory services. I think we'll see a lot of these Bitcoin custody solutions like Unchained and the companies behind them evolve into the Goldman Sachs's of the Bitcoin standard, where they really understand what's going on in the market, whether it pertains to custody, financing, and opportunities that exist out there to invest and take equity positions in companies. Because that's where it's going to go, I believe, is instead of sort of expanding the economy via debt, it's going to be equity investments, and brings opportunity costs back to the market. That's what a Bitcoin standard will do. And so the idea is that you'll be able to get equity positions in companies that are producing cash flows, and they're able to return that capital plus some moving forward. And so I think in terms of the business models of these companies, that's how I think they'll evolve. We're at the very early stages, but people are actually going to have to provide value at the end of the day.
With the growth pains we're experiencing and just some of the rug pulls we've seen over the like several years, obviously there's a lot of unfortunate results of that. I mean, a lot of people have got really hurt, and it's created a lot of fear for people who are starting to have comfort in this, and now suddenly something bad comes out and said, "Oh, maybe the fears that I had were rightful." And yeah, people lost a lot of money, and that's really sad. Especially like, I mean, I've known people who, you know, like I actually, I didn't think I knew anyone, but I found out a few months ago that a friend of mine had all of his Bitcoin at FTX, lost a whole bunch of money. And that's really sad. Like this kid worked really hard all of his 20s, saved insanely aggressively, saving like 80% of his income, and it's all gone. And so that's really sad. But another sad outcome is for the lack of clarity at who's at fault here. And what I mean by that is I've heard people say, like when we talk about these exchanges being hacked, or the rehypothecation and then the loss due to gambling on the third party's act. People who don't understand Bitcoin say, hey, I thought that thing that just happened, I thought Bitcoin was supposed to fix that. Suddenly you lost your Bitcoin because of X or Y. Bitcoin is supposed to fix that. And then suddenly Bitcoin's this scapegoat of blame. So could you help us understand that? I know this is sort of off topic, but these things that have taken place, these scams that have come out, are like literally, I lost my Bitcoin because of this. Bitcoin's at fault. Like, why is Bitcoin at fault, or why is Bitcoin not at fault? And who is then when all these things happen?
No, I mean, what you're leaning into is centralized third parties are security holes. And that's what FTX was. That's what Mt. Gox was. That's what Celsius, BlockFi were. And I think a lot of the money that's been lost over the first 15 years, particularly via these third party security holes, is due to a lack of knowledge on the end consumer's part, not understanding that with Bitcoin, they had the ability to audit where their Bitcoin should be at any given point in time. And again, that's why I'm very excited about what Unchained's doing and others to push forward this multi-institution, multi-sig model, because I do think that will be a standard once the knowledge of this type of custody solution permeates the market and then consumers understand that it exists in the first place and that it's possible in the first place. We'll get to a point where it's demanded, where you will not engage with a third party that's handling your Bitcoin unless they have this multi-institution, multi-sig custody enabled, because the benefits provided by this model are step function improvement that you would be dumb not to interact with a company doing that.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, I took us. You presented one very. You said it was like base level. Before we go further, we need to understand this, and then I sidetracked conversation for 10 minutes. So yeah, what else? Like, what other things do you see as like, all right, this will be an impact from a Bitcoin standard?
So Bitcoin, peer-to-peer digital cash system, running on a distributed system with limited counterparty risk and, very importantly, quick time to transaction finality, relatively quick time compared to the incumbent banking system. And that gets supercharged on second layers like the Lightning Network, which allow you to lock up Bitcoin in a 2 of 2 multi-sig and then send small amounts of Bitcoin or large amounts of Bitcoin instantly and settle instantly. And so I think the instant settlement aspect of second layers like the Lightning Network is going to unlock a lot of economic opportunity that simply is not possible in the incumbent banking and financial system and the payment system built on top of it via companies like MasterCard, Visa, Stripe, PayPal. The fact that we now have the Lightning Network that allows us to send small or large transactions, very small, we're talking microtransactions, instantly and have final settlement is a massive unlock. It prevents things like chargeback risk for companies, which end up in higher prices for end consumers because those companies have to factor in chargebacks. If somebody buys something with a credit card and then they go to their credit card company and say, "Hey, I actually didn't buy this," that's a significant cost for a lot of businesses throughout the economy. Lightning Network solves that, and it's cross-border payments without permission, being able to remit money back to a family member who may be living in a country like Venezuela or Argentina or Nigeria or India, to do that instantly while evading companies like Western Union that typically take up to 30% of the transaction when you make it. That's going to be massive cost savings for the end consumer. And then what I'm really excited about for the Lightning Network and where it really gets sci-fi, it has given us the ability to fully realize the original view of the internet. And so when they designed the internet and built the protocol, they envisioned that there would be a payments layer. And they actually built a payments layer, or sort of an HTTP 402 error into the layered stack of the internet, imagining that there would be a payments layer of the internet when they originally designed it. And it wasn't until Bitcoin, and more specifically the Lightning Network, launched that we've had the ability to realize that original idea. And so now with the Lightning Network, with Bitcoin, we can essentially inject the internet with a native payments layer. and it's happening in real time. And so to give you actionable sort of examples of this, like one thing, AI is very popular right now. But right now, if you want to use AI compute, you set up an account with OpenAI, you get your credit card information, you pay a monthly fee, and you may use it once or twice a month just for fun. Maybe you're not using it, you're using it as a hobbyist, but you're paying $20 a month, which is very inefficient. You're not getting $20 worth of value out of the 3 times that you use it per month. With something like the Lightning Network, uh, you can completely granularize your usage of AI tools in a way that was never possible, would not be possible using the incumbent rails. And so there's extension wallets in your browser. One of them is Alby. Getalby.com is their website, ALBY. And this essentially allows you to put a Bitcoin wallet in your browser and load it up with Bitcoin. And then as you go surf the web and you interact with websites that accept Bitcoin over the Lightning Network, you can automatically pay it right there. And we're beginning to see this with AI models where if somebody doesn't want to pay a monthly fee to OpenAI, but they just want to use the model once or twice, they can go to particular websites that have set up essentially a Bitcoin payment gateway between the end user and the AI compute. And so you would go say, hey, I'd like you to make a picture of Jim Kreider looking handsome in New Braunfels by the river. You'd
We
hit
don't need AI for that, baby. That's a real
you hit
thing.
send, and then essentially your browser says, hey, if you want this, give us 10 sats worth of Bitcoin, give us half a penny in Bitcoin, and you hit send, boom, you get your compute right back. And so that is a use case that, again, was not possible in the incumbent system. So it gives the end user the ability to spend um, uh, small amounts of money to get things done on the internet very quickly. And from the AI company's perspective, like they're okay doing that because they know they don't have any chargeback risk. As soon as the invoice is paid, the Bitcoin is in their wallet, and there's nothing I can do. I can't call um, American Express and say, "Hey, I didn't buy that AI compute. I need you to send me those Sats back." It's not possible.
Yeah, someone else wanted that handsome picture of Jim by the river. That wasn't me. Let me here we'll break this down. I'll play stupid. Play stupid. We'll what's the difference between have a internet native payment system versus being able to pay via Venmo or put my credit card information on the internet? How's that any different, and what's the benefit of having a internet native payment versus like giving my MasterCard online?
So when you give your Mastercard online, it's not internet native. You essentially duct taped a like credit card form on top of a website, and then once you fill that out, the website sends that information up to Mastercard or Visa, says, "Hey, is this information good?" And they say, "Yes, it's good." And then manually, using their own systems, Visa, Mastercard will take money out of your account and give it to the company um, that you're paying for their good or service, and that's not native at all. It's very clunky. You have a message going from the website to Visa, Mastercard server. They're saying, yes, you're good. Give them the good. And then they're on their servers taking money out of your account and giving it to the business, and you're getting the good in return. Whereas with Bitcoin being natively integrated into HTTP, there's no calling of that service. It's either you have the Bitcoin in your wallet or you don't in the browser. And so it's essentially the company just calling your you your endpoint and saying, "Hey, do you have the money to pay?" You say, "Yes, I do." It sends the payment, and it's a peer-to-peer transaction between you and that service or good provider. At the end of the day, they're not pinging something externally, and depending on somebody else's servers, it's literally a we'll know you had the Bitcoin if we ping you and you're able to pay the invoice. We don't have to ask anybody else.
Which, I mean, this carries out practically benefits in a few huge ways. One, from a time perspective, it's instantaneous settlement versus a lot of people don't recognize. Like, I guess we do, sort of, in a sense, but like when you go, there's a bakery across the street from my office, dangerously close. If I go over there and uh, buy a croissant in a bit, and I pay with my credit card, that doesn't actually settle instantaneously. I swipe the card; it sort of feels like it does. So a lot of people don't recognize that that's a difference between paying in a credit card versus paying in Bitcoin, the actual instantaneous settlement. So the how quick this happens, but also just the I think something that's really important here is the fees that we're seeing. So like at least in my town, I'm starting to see a lot of smaller restaurants are increasing their cost and will have an itemized or a line item on the receipt for credit card fee. So things are getting really tight. I mean, obviously, everyone's experiencing inflation, including the businesses themselves. Um, in one total sidetrack, there's a lot of people who don't understand how we've arrived at where we are from an economic perspective, and they blame corporations uh, for inflation, as if like every few years corporations get together and they do this little thing with their fingers and a couple Scrooge McDucks and swim around and in gold, and then they say, hey, let's go ahead and we've been making good profits lately, but let's really stick it to them and let's all increase our prices at the same time. And to think that that's how economics work, and like, oh, that's why I don't like this, and we need to go to a Marxist society is because of this. So, it's capitalism, as
It's
if
the
as if that's
bourgeoisie.
what. Yeah, it's as if that is what's causing inflation, is this gathering of corporate leaders every few years to say, all right, now we're going to do it. It's clearly it goes back to the money itself. Okay, total sidetrack. Anyways, so people are experiencing inflation, and so are companies. And one thing I'm seeing right now is companies in my town are passing on one of those inflationary hits. The way they're hedging that is by passing on credit card fees because they're expensive, like 3-4% for a credit card transaction in a first world country. I'm not talking if I go to Africa and try to pay and they're trying to verify payments across borders, just in town. So I would love to see, like, and this is a very simple one. Like, this could happen very quickly, and it's already happening obviously with companies that do accept Bitcoin Lightning payments. But I could see this being a very entry level way of more of like hyper Bitcoinization in a real life day to day manner of restaurants taking Lightning payments. And hey, if you pay via Bitcoin, you won't have this 3.5% increase, or we'll give you a 3.5% uh, uh, deduction on your bill. I would love to see that. Like, are you familiar with any companies that are working on this outside of, like, obviously there's super niche places like that you and I are familiar with. You go and buy like a Bitcoin shirt or a Bitcoin little fun gadget, you can pay in Bitcoin. But are you familiar with, is there anyone who's working on actual payments that, like the Mexican restaurant down the street would be able to set up, and like I go in and pay with my Bitcoin, and it's not this weird, like, oh, you like Bitcoin too? But like normal people, my parents go out and it's like, hey, if I do this, I can download this wallet, I can pay in Bitcoin, and I just save money. And we start seeing this in a real life place. Like, are you seeing anything like that?
Yeah, I mentioned him earlier. I don't want to pump his wheels too hard here, but Parker Lewis works for a company Zapprate, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're building invoicing software for businesses and individuals. We use it here at TFTC. And she found out last month that my direct personal care doctor is using it now. And so essentially what Zapprate allows you to do is to connect your wallets. They're wallet agnostic. So you can have an account at Strike, at River, uh, Unchained, and you can plug your wallets into their software. You could self-host your own wallets, your own hardware wallets, and plug that in to their software. And then essentially what they do is they allow you to hook up your fiat payments as well, so Stripe and bank accounts directly, and create this invoicing software that allows you to set permissions or set up your invoice in a particular way where you can present to your end user or your client, hey, here's your invoice. You can pay using Stripe and pay me in dollars. Here's the price. And if you pay in Bitcoin, you can get a 10% discount, 20% discount. They've actually fixed flipped the framing where, and I think this is actually very smart. Instead of getting a discount in Bitcoin, it's a premium for the fiat, where if you're going to pay in fiat, it's 10% more expensive. And I think that small psychological tweak is actually pretty important. But yeah, that software, and that gets back to what I said earlier. in the conversation was like, how do we get to hyper Bitcoinization? It's creating tools like ZapRight that abstract something as simple like invoicing, where you don't have to go into a wallet and pick an address to send to somebody. You just plug it in to ZapRight, and the software knows how to go find an address and send it to somebody, a lightning invoice and sending it to somebody. So that it's tools like ZapRight being built and then getting adopted. And again, going back to my personal life, I was actually shouldn't be, but I was shocked that my wife, my kids, and I, we use a direct personal care doctor that we essentially pay a monthly fee. It's called Ultra Personal Healthcare, based out of Dripping Springs, right outside of Austin. And Veronica, who runs that, decided she wants to hold Bitcoin in her balance sheet and uses ZapRight to give us the option. Hey, here's your monthly bill. You can pay in fiat or Bitcoin. And so, yeah, more of that being enabled by software like ZapRight is how we get closer to this Bitcoin standard.
What else? So I think that is one of the most practical outside of like buying Bitcoin, holding Bitcoin. Those are fundamental. We have to have on ramps for right now. And eventually the on ramps, if we think through like a total Bitcoinized world, like theoretically, and there's, does the US dollar always coexist or whatever, fiat or country's currency coexist with Bitcoin, or will Bitcoin be the money itself? And, I don't know. Like, I think fiat currencies will exist for quite a while, longer than I'd like them to. And I think that will probably make for a healthier transition. But anyway, so we'll have to have off ramps and on ramps, and then obviously holding it is super important to make sure it's actually safe. So those are foundational. How do I get access to this? Be it buying it or mining it or transferring it from peer to peer. Then how do I make sure that's kept safely? So we spoke to both of those earlier. And then how do I spend it? That's something you just spoke to right now. Like there's companies that are popping up. Like I can set up and receive this, and there's means of sending it, and that's primarily going to be through the Lightning channel. Like we talked through this is in a previous conversation, the Lightning network versus base layer payments, and how that's one of the critiques of Bitcoin is it's too clunky and takes too long. But like there's trade-offs with that. You can have something that goes a lot faster, but there's inefficiencies that take place with trying to highlight that efficiency. If you think through like I'm not much of a video game person, but if you're playing an old school video game maybe, and you're building your ideal basketball player, and you have 100 points you can divvy up, you can make that basketball player the biggest guy on the tallest guy on the court, but he has a terrible shot. Or you can go for a guy who has amazing 3-pointer, but like he's super slow, whatever. There's so many points you can divvy up. And that's when we think through Bitcoin itself. Like there's trade-offs, there's opportunity cost. And we like Bitcoin itself, it is slow and clunky every 10 minutes for a block, and only so many things that go into a block. But that makes sure the security and the decentralized nature of Bitcoin itself is emphasized. And that's where personally, I think anyone who understands Bitcoin and understands the problem that Bitcoin set out to solve is we're not trying to get the most fast and efficient means of payment. We're trying to get the most secure and decentralized means of payment online and out there. So that's where these other layers come in. It's like, all right, how do we then, once we have security nailed down, how do we then add efficiencies? Okay, so that brings us to Lightning Network and payment rails. Anything else you're seeing? Like there's neat things, I think, like streaming, where you can pay like a sat per second or whatever for something you stream. Like you could, I don't even know. I live in this really small bubble of Bitcoin and weird spot of Bitcoin and traditional finance, but you have this awesome opportunity to see other things. Like what other things out there excite you? It could be super boring, or it could be like, wow, I haven't even thought of that yet.
Well, we'll combine a couple things here. I'm very interested in mining as well. I've been professionally involved in the industry for 5 years now. It's one of the early members of Great American Mining. We did off-grid Bitcoin mining in on upstream oil and gas wells to do flare mitigation in North Dakota. I've learned a lot during that, and have really fallen down the mining rabbit hole over the last 5 years. And I am wholly convinced that what we're witnessing is the beginning stages of an integration of the energy sector in the Bitcoin mining industry. And I think that's extremely bullish. And what we're seeing both on grid and off grid is just Bitcoin mining being this mechanism to be as energy efficient as possible to eke out as much economic value from the energy sources we're pulling out of the ground, the electricity we're creating on the grid as possible. So on grid, we're also involved with a company called Standard Bitcoin now, where essentially what we do is we go and we find rural areas in Tennessee and Kentucky right now that have falling populations, and they have falling populations because they had large manufacturing facilities move out of the neighborhood, either recently or decades ago, because of globalization, because the way the dollar works is we had to flood the rest of the world with dollars to drive demand for the dollar's reserve currency. And one of the ways we did that was buy cheap goods from other countries and neglect our own manufacturing base. So what we're seeing at Standard Bitcoin is this sort of fixing of that problem, where we're able to go into these small rural areas that have substations that haven't been fully utilized for years because the manufacturing facility that was pulling electricity from it doesn't exist anymore. So there's not as much demand for that electricity, but the substation's still there with a ton of capacity. And so what we do is we show up to town and we say, hey, we notice you got the substation here. Like, how much excess capacity do you have? And they say, all right, we got 10 megawatts and of excess capacity. We go, all right, we'll buy that from you. And what this does is it allows the local utility to buy more power in bulk from the TVA where we are. And since they can buy more power in bulk, they get lower pricing. And since they're a utility co-op with a mandate to keep residential prices low, they're able to pass that low price onto residential consumers who are paying their electricity bill month in, month out. And again, this is a perfect example of Bitcoin just creating this economic incentive to create efficiencies. Like, we're able to get lower pricing because the utility is able to buy in bulk. The residents able to get lower pricing because they can buy in bulk. We're able to mine cheap Bitcoin profitably. The town benefits, and you begin reversing this problem that the globalization of the dollar created starting in 1971. And so that's not really a technical aspect of Bitcoin. That's the physical aspect of Bitcoin, which is the mining world, which is very energy intensive. And so that's another thing I'm extremely excited about. I mean, at Standard Bitcoin, again, the whole mining game is driving your costs down as low as possible. So our thesis is what we're building next to these substations right now is essentially a proof of concept for utilities companies that are going to see what we're doing. They're going to see the revenues. We're able to pay them. And then there's going to be a switch that flips in their minds eventually, which is like, hey, we can actually mine cheaper than these guys because we have the power and we can just mine at cost. And eventually utilities companies and power companies and energy companies that are extracting molecules upstream or wherever they may be will integrate mining into their business stack. So that's a big one. And then we can tie it back to the Lightning Network as well. There's companies like Satoshi Energy and Sonoda where they're building Lightning software and accounting software that enables, or starting with miners as their first users, that enables miners to pay their power bills to utilities using the Lightning Network on a daily basis. For the utility, that is a massive benefit because they don't have to wait N60 and 90, whatever it may be, to get paid. They can get paid every day as these miners are mining Bitcoin. You get paid in Bitcoin, your pool payout comes, and then you're able, you set up a Lightning channel and you're able to pay your bill on the go. And that actually gives the utility comfortability with the miner, where the miner then doesn't have to put up a big deposit on the front end and lock up all that capital. They can go be more capital efficient outside of that setup as well. So yeah, the efficiencies that Bitcoin brings both in the digital and physical world, I think, are extremely underappreciated right now. And we're at this point 15 years in where they're really beginning to coalesce and become obvious to those of us who are very close to the industry and live and breathe it day in and day out. But I think over the next decade, the benefits that it provides both on the software side and on the hardware side in the physical world are going to be completely obvious in retrospect. You're like, oh yeah, everybody's going to be like, yeah, this was a no-brainer. Bitcoin was always going to succeed.
I think obviously mining Bitcoin gets a lot of critique, and one of those is more directly to related to the mining aspect and the quote unquote waste of energy it is. And I think there's two places that people view a waste of energy. And I was actually thinking about one of these this morning. Um, well, the one that's usually alluded to is the waste of like physical energy. So electric cost and oil and gas or whatever. It's like, okay, that could be better used by heating homes or cooling homes, or I don't know, like whatever, like funding the war machine or whatever we think is a better use of energy. Another critique that I don't hear as often is the better use of energy. We have energy that's going towards Bitcoin that could be better used elsewhere, and that's the people's energy, the amount of smart minds working in Bitcoin. What if Bitcoin want to think? Why do we have this weird pet project that we're using energy and mind power on when we could better focus that on building things like, I don't know, for medicine to save people's lives, or I don't know, any project you deem more valid. And those sound good until you recognize the problem that Bitcoin's solving. So if you think that the physical energy expended to mine Bitcoin is a total waste, you have not got to a point of recognizing the alternative. And the alternative is the current money system that we have. So, okay, if we don't have Bitcoin, a better form of money, in our opinion, then we stay with status quo. And status quo right now, there's no money going towards it. Versus Bitcoin is, it seems like, all right, Bitcoin costs a lot of physical energy. Status quo costs nothing. This is way off, but like, what are the costs of staying on a dollar standard? Like, what does that cost us, and why should we expend energy on Bitcoin from a physical energy perspective?
Yeah, and on this note, and I've got to run here in a bit, but I think it's important to end on this because what I just described is a very direct first order effect of the energy efficiency that Bitcoin mining can provide the world. There's all these inefficiencies, whether it be flaring natural gas upstream or just having all this electrical infrastructure that's completely underutilized in the Rust Belt because all the manufacturing capacity moved out. Like that's a first order efficiency gain by Bitcoin miners showing up, reducing that flare, taking advantage of that excess capacity. That makes systems more efficient, more profitable, and creates a better economic outcome for everybody involved at the end of the day. The second order effect of a Bitcoin standard, which is I think what you were alluding to, is it brings opportunity cost back to the market, which makes it hard to print money. It makes it impossible to print money out of thin air, which brings the opportunity cost back. And so in the incumbent fiat system, the fact that the governments and central banks of the world can just go in and create money at no cost and then go allocate that money to whatever they deem necessary at any given point in time, whether it be war, solar and wind infrastructure, healthcare, education, that many would argue has been misallocated money
The
pretty
big
terribly.
man, whatever.
Yeah, the big man. Yeah. And so what Bitcoin does and the Bitcoin standard will reintroduce is since you can't do that, you bring opportunity cost back to the market. So you reduce the misallocation of capital because instead of just hitting a button, printing money and throwing it at whatever you want, you have 21 million Bitcoin and you have to make an informed decision of how you allocate that capital. Ideally, you allocate that capital and invest in things that are going to be productive and create cash flows that return your money then some at the end of the day and add value, quality of life, and productivity to the rest of the economy. And so that is when you talk about the energy debate and juxtaposing fiat to Bitcoin, what I think people really need to internalize is the ability to print money out of thin air at no cost and then throw it at whatever the government wants is a massive waste of energy. There's no opportunity cost. There's no economic calculation that needs to go into that. You can just print money and throw it at what you want. Under a Bitcoin standard, it's simply impossible. You have to make educated decisions about how you're allocating capital. And when the opportunity cost of misallocating that capital is high, you're not going to waste energy on things that aren't going to return productivity and increase the quality of life to the rest of the economy.
Yeah, it's a cheap, very expensive alternative. It would be like, I know you have a couple young kids. I have a few young kids as well. So the fiat versus Bitcoin for my kids, I just thought of right now would be like, I do dishes feel like nonstop. And the fiat way, like my kids are fighting, I hear them fighting. The fiat response would be for me to yell, "Hey, shut up!" Like whatever, just go off on them. That doesn't cost anything. I can keep doing the thing that was important to me in that moment, and it solves a problem right then. It costs me nothing. Or I can stop what I'm doing, use energy to go sit down with them, talk through, hey, what's going on? How do we fix your behavior right now, but also change the way you behave moving forward and learn something from that. In that moment, that costs a lot more. That would be the Bitcoin. It costs something. But the long-term perspective of like, well, the yelling at them is free. It's like, no, but what are you creating by that? You're creating a whole system that is built on fragility and is not healthy. And that's where we're at right now is like, look, are we looking at just the cost in this moment? Like I have to stop doing dishes. Like, what are you actually building? And I think that's what Bitcoin forces you to take a step out and say, like, what are the long-term implications, multi-generational impact here? And what are we building on something that's healthy versus are we building on something that's convenient in this moment? And unfortunately, we've been building based off convenience for a long time, and it's certainly catching up to us.
Yeah, the back end pain created by that high time preference decision to take the easy route out is, I mean, as you mentioned, you've talked with Preston and James Lavish, and I'm sure if you've watched those episodes, you understand the severity of the situation we've been put into as a global society due to all the debt that's been run up by these governments. Could be a lot of pain in the future. And it's because the governments and central banks took the easy way out. They hit the button, printed money out of thin air, and just threw it at problems instead of taking the time to sit down and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't have been using our money this way. Maybe we should think about moving in another direction, especially considering that we're transitioning into the digital age. I do think it's important for people to really grok this, the fact that opportunity cost in a world in which money can be printed out of thin air does not exist. Or if it does exist, it's very small. It's very small cost. Under a Bitcoin standard, opportunity cost gets correctly priced and people make allocation decisions based on educated sort of frames of mind that force people to actually think through the implications of how they're allocating money. Where today, it really does. You can spin up trillions of dollars and throw it at airlines and pharmaceutical companies and banks, and they can, again, that creates a disincentive for them to actually act nobly or morally or ethically within the economy. They know that the central bank or government's always going to hit the button and bail them out at the end of the day.
And on that light note, no, that's I think what it comes down to is like to fully understand this, you have to change your way of thinking and zoom out. And yeah, there's a place of being myopic and like understanding the technicalities of this, which I love. Like again, a lot of the companies you've mentioned and stuff, they've zoomed in on very specific areas of making Bitcoin better in the world. But you also have to zoom out and see like, why are we doing this? And so I appreciate you taking time and letting us zoom in a little bit, and also retain a healthy perspective of why is this important. So Marty, again, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Jim, thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Intentional Living podcast. Now, today's show is simply entertainment and educational in nature. Do not take this as tax, legal, or investment advice. If you are looking for tax, legal, or investment advice, you should go talk with a tax, legal, and or investment advisor. But again, this content is simply educational and entertainment purposes. Thanks again for listening. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode.